They laughed at the hungry alien boy, until the human said, "Take mine, I'm full." Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The Cafeteria of the Galactic Youth Integration Academy hummed with the sounds of 100 different species, eating, chattering, and navigating the complex social hierarchies that existed in every school across the known universe. Amid the controlled chaos, a small Vexirian boy named Tao sat alone at the far end of a long metal table, his thin frame hunched over an empty tray. His large golden eyes followed every student who passed by with plates piled high with food, and his stomach made quiet sounds that he desperately tried to hide beneath his folded arms. The academy floated in neutral space, massive station designed to bring together the youth of the Galactic Council's member species. It was supposed to be a place of unity, learning, and cultural exchange. For most students, it was exactly that. For Tao, it had become a daily reminder of everything he lacked. Vexarians were one of the newer species to join the Council, and they came from a world that had only recently emerged from centuries of resource scarcity. The Council had accepted them as a gesture of goodwill, but that acceptance came with conditions. Vexarian students received only the minimum required provisions, just enough to meet the baseline nutritional standards set by intergalactic law. It was survival, not comfort. It was existence, not living. Tao had learned quickly that the cafeteria operated on a credit system. Each student received an allowance based on their species standing within the Council. The Century student, whose people controlled vast mining operations across 3 sectors, could afford second and third helpings. The Morvani, master traders and diplomats, never wanted for anything. Even the Bernaki, a warrior species that had only joined the Council 50 cycles ago, received better provisions than the Vexirians. The boy watched as a group of Century students passed his table, their trays overflowing with glazed proteins, vitamin-rich vegetables, and sweet desserts that released pleasant aromas into the air. One of them, a tall youth named Gorak, noticed Heiko staring and sneered. Gorak called out loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Hey everyone, look at the charity case. Too poor to even buy lunch today." Vex. Several students turned to look. Some left. Others quickly averted their eyes, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Tao felt his face grow warm with shame, his golden eyes dropping to his empty tray. He had eaten breakfast, if the small nutrient-paste cube could be called that, but it had been more than 8 hours ago. His species required more frequent feeding than most, their metabolisms running hot to compensate for generations of adaptation to a harsh world. Going this long without food made him lightheaded and nauseous. Another Century student joined in the mockery. She said in a voice dripping with false sympathy, "Maybe if your people had actually contributed something valuable to the Council, you would not be starving." But what do Vexarians offer? Nothing. The laughter spread. Even some of the more reserved species cracked smiles. It was easy to join in, easy to punch down, easy to feel superior when someone else occupied the bottom rung of the social ladder. Tao wanted to disappear. He wanted to leave, but standing up and walking away with an empty tray would only invite more mockery. He was trapped in his own humiliation, a spectacle for the entertainment of students who had never known hunger, never understood what it meant to have your worth measured by your species' economic output. That was when the human arrived. Nathan Brooks had been at the academy for only 3 weeks. Humans were the absolute newest addition to the Galactic Council, so new that most species still considered their membership provisional. Earth had been discovered by a Morvani exploration vessel less than 2 cycles ago, and the Council had been both fascinated and puzzled by the strange species they found there. Humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest by any single metric. They existed in what seemed to be the middle range of nearly every measurable category, yet something about them had convinced the Council to extend an invitation. Nathan was average height for a human, with brown hair that never quite stayed in place and green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore the standard academy jumpsuit like everyone else, but somehow on him it looked slightly rumpled, as if he had never quite figured out how to seal it properly. He had been standing in the food line when the mockery of Tao began. He had watched the entire scene unfold while waiting for his meal to be prepared. The automated food dispensers did not recognize human nutritional requirements yet, so Nathan had to manually select items from the general database. He had chosen a protein portion, some kind of grain, vegetables that supposedly tasted similar to Earth varieties, and a dessert that looked like it might be sweet. Nathan paid for his meal with his credits and carried his tray away from the counter. The logical path to the human seating section was to the right, where 2 other Earth students sat together, but Nathan turned left instead. He walked directly to Tycho's table. The Vexarian boy did not notice him at first, too focused on trying to become invisible. It was only when Nathan set his tray down on the table directly across from Tao that the boy looked up. Startled, Nathan slid the tray across the smooth metal surface until it sat directly in front of Tao. He said with a casual smile, "Take mine. I'm full." The entire cafeteria seemed to pause. Tao stared at the tray of food, then up at Nathan, his golden eyes wide with confusion. He stammered, But you just got this. You have not eaten anything." Nathan shrugged and sat down across from him. He replied, "I had a huge breakfast. Seriously, I'm not even hungry. You would be doing me favor." It was an obvious lie, and everyone within earshot knew it. But it was delivered with such casual sincerity that it did not feel like pity. It felt like something else entirely. Gorak recovered from his shock first. He barked out, "What do you think you are doing, human?" Nathan turned to face the Century student, his expression neutral. He answered simply, "Having lunch, or actually not having lunch, like I said. I'm full." The Century's face darkened with anger. He said with venom, "That Vex does not deserve charity. His kind barely qualifies as sentient. They contribute nothing." Nathan stood up slowly. He was not particularly tall or physically imposing, but something in the way he moved made Gorak take an involuntary step backward. The human's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "You know what I think is really interesting? Back on Earth we have these birds called vultures. They circle around looking for anything weak or dying, and then they swoop in to tear it apart, not because they are hungry, really, but because that is just what They do, it is their nature, Gorax. Face twisted with confusion and rage, he demanded, "What are you calling me?" Nathan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He stated, "I am saying that picking on someone because they have less than you is pretty much the lowest form of behavior in any species. It does not make you look strong or important. It just makes you look like a scavenger, feeding on someone else's misery." Cafeteria had gone completely silent. Now, students from a dozen different species watched the confrontation with rapt attention. Humans were still largely unknown quantities, and no one was quite sure what to expect from them. The Century took a step forward, trying to use his considerable height advantage to intimidate. He growled, "You have been here 3 weeks, human. You know nothing about how things work. The Vixarians are bottom tier for a reason." Nathan did not back down. His voice remained steady as he said, "Where I come from, we had a lot of wars, thousands of them over our history. You know what we learned? The people who judge others by arbitrary hierarchies, who decide someone's worth based on where they come from or what they have, those people always end up on the wrong side of history, always." One of the other Century students tried a different approach, appealing to logic. She explained, "The council determines resource allocation based on contribution metrics. It is simple economics. The Vixarians receive what they earn, nothing more." Nathan turned to her. He said, "Right, so a kid who had no choice about where he was born, who did nothing except exist, deserves to go hungry because his planet does not have the right resources. That is not economics, that is just cruelty with extra steps." Tao had been watching this entire exchange with growing amazement. No one had ever defended him before. No one had ever challenged the social order on his behalf. He looked down at the tray of food in front of him, still untouched, and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Gorek was not finished, he declared with contempt. "This is why humans will never be full. Council members, you do not understand how civilization works. Resources are limited. Hierarchies exist for a reason. The strong survive and prosper. The weak serve or starve. That is the natural order." Nathan laughed, an actual genuine laugh that caught everyone off guard. He said, "The natural order, let me tell you something about the natural order on Earth. For most of our history, we were not even close to the top of the food chain. We were hunted by bigger predators, killed by diseases, wiped out by natural disasters. By your logic, we should have just accepted our place and died out." He paused, looking around at the assembled students. Then he continued, "But we did not. You know why? Because we figured out that the thing that actually makes a species strong is not raw power or resources. It is cooperation. It is looking out for each other. It is deciding that just because someone is down does not mean they deserve to stay there." A Morvani student spoke up from a nearby table, her tone curious rather than hostile. She asked, "But surely you have hierarchies on Earth. Surely some have more than others." Nathan nodded. He admitted, "Absolutely. We are far from perfect. We have inequality. We have injustice. We have all kinds of problems. But the difference is most of us recognize those things as problems to solve, not features to celebrate. When we see someone hungry, the instinct is not to laugh at them, it is to feed them." Gorek made a disgusted sound. He declared, "Weak, that attitude is weak. It is Probably why your species has not even left your own solar system yet. Nathan's smile returned, sharper this time. He countered, we have not left our solar system because we only just got invited to the party. But let me ask you something. Your people have been spacefaring for what, 500 cycles, and in all that time, what have you actually built? You mine resources and trade them, that is it. You are cosmic middlemen. The insult landed harder than any physical blow could have. Gorak's face flushed a deep purple. Mining and resource management was the foundation of Century pride, and to have it dismissed so casually was intolerable. Before the situation could escalate further, a new voice cut through the tension. Enough. An instructor had arrived, a Morvani elder named Veshna, who served as one of the Academy's cultural integration specialists. She was tall and elegant with silver skin that seemed to shimmer under the cafeteria lights. Her authority was unquestionable. VNA said firmly, students will return to their meals. This disruption is concluded. Gorak looked like he wanted to argue, but even Century arrogance had limits when facing a direct order from an instructor. He shot Nathan one final glare before turning and walking back to his table. The other students gradually resumed their conversations, though many continued to glance over at the human and the Vixarian. Vashna approached Nathan's table. She looked at the tray of food sitting in front of Tycho, then at Nathan, then back to the food. Her expression was unreadable. She said quietly, Mr. Brooks, a word. Nathan followed her a short distance away from the table. Vesha spoke in a low voice. That would not carry, she stated. What you did was noble, but you should understand the complications. The resource allocation system exists for specific reasons. If every student began redistributing their provisions, the entire economic model of the Academy would destabilize. Nathan met her gaze. He replied with respect, ma'am, I do not care about the economic model. I care about that kid getting to eat lunch. VHNA studied him for a long moment, then something that might have been approval flickered across her features. She said, humans are going to be very disruptive to council dynamics. I think very well. I will note in my report that you were unaware of the cultural implications, but Nathan, be careful. You have made enemies today. He glanced back at Gorak's table. He said, I have made enemies before. Instructor left and Nathan returned to his seat across from Tao. The Vexirian boy had still not touched the food. He looked at Nathan with an expression caught between gratitude and fear. He whispered, you should not have done that. They will make things difficult for you now. Nathan waved a hand dismissively. He said, they can try. Now, are you going to eat that, or are you going to let me starve for nothing? Tycho's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. He picked up the utensil and took a small, hesitant bite of the protein. The flavor seemed to surprise him, and he took another bite, then another. Nathan watched with satisfaction, leaning back in his chair. After a few minutes of eating, Tao paused. He asked quietly why. Nathan knew what he was asking. He thought for a moment before answering. He said, because a long time ago on Earth, my grandfather told me something. He said that you can judge a civilization by how it treats its most vulnerable members, not by its technology or its military or its economy, but by whether it leaves people Behind Tao absorbed this, he said. Softly, on my world, we have a similar saying, a chain is only as strong as its most neglected link. Nathan smiled. He replied, your world sounds pretty smart. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Tao felt something that resembled hope. Over the following days, the incident in the cafeteria rippled through the student population. The story spread quickly, mutating slightly with each retelling, but maintaining its essential core. The human had defied social norms to feed a Vexarian. The human had stood up to Zentury students without backing down. The human had said things that no one else dared to say. Nathan found himself at the center of attention he had not sought and did not particularly want. Other human students approached him with mixed reactions. Some were proud, feeling that he had represented Earth well. Others worried that he had painted a target on all humans by antagonizing established power structures. One evening in the human dormitory section, a girl named Sarah Morgan confronted him. She said with frustration, you realize you probably just made things harder for all of us, right? We are already on probation with the council. We cannot afford to make waves. Nathan was sitting on his bunk reading from a data pad. He looked up at her and replied, Sarah, if the price of being in the council is watching kids go hungry and keeping our mouths shut about it, maybe we should not be here at all. Sarah shook her head. She argued, it is not that simple. There are politics involved, economics, centuries of established protocols. We cannot just come in and change everything because we do not like how things work. Nathan sat down his data pad. He said calmly, every major change in human history started because someone decided they could not just accept how things worked. Civil rights, worker protections, child welfare laws, none of that happened because people respected the established order. It happened because people decided the established order was wrong. Another human student, a boy named Marcus Dean, spoke up from across the room. He said, but we are not on Earth anymore. These are alien cultures with their own values and histories. Who are we to tell them they are wrong? Nathan stood up. He stated, I'm not telling anyone their culture is wrong. I am telling them that letting a kid starve when there is plenty of food available is wrong. If that is too radical a position, then I guess I am radical. The discussion continued for another hour, circular and unresolved. The human students were divided, unsure of their place in this vast galactic community, uncertain whether they should adapt or push back. Nathan went asleep that night with no clear answers, but with the conviction that he had done the right thing. Meanwhile, Tycho's life had changed in ways both subtle and significant. Other Vexarian students, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began sitting together more openly. Instead of isolating themselves, they were still at the bottom of the social hierarchy, but they carried themselves with slightly more dignity. Tao himself found that some students who had previously ignored him now offered small nods of acknowledgement in the hallways. But there was a darker side to the change as well. Gorek and his circle had not forgotten the humiliation. They began a campaign of subtle harassment. Nothing overt enough to draw instructor attention, but a constant undercurrent of hostility. They would bump into Nathan in hallways, crowd him out of seats in common areas, and spread rumors about humans being primitive and universalized. Nathan ignored most of it. He had dealt with bullies before back on Earth, and he knew that reaction was what they wanted, but the situation was building towards something, and everyone could feel it. The breaking point came 2 weeks after the cafeteria incident. Nathan had been assigned to a group project in his galactic history class, tasked with creating a presentation about a significant cultural exchange between species. His group consisted of himself, a quiet Bernanke girl named Stoa, and unfortunately Gorak, the instructor, apparently oblivious to the tensions, had assigned groups randomly. Nathan had considered requesting a change but decided against it. Running away from conflict was not his style. They met in one of the Academy's study chambers, a circular room with holographic displays and adaptive seating. Stora arrived first, followed by Nathan and finally Gorak, who made a show of looking disgusted at having to work with them. Gorak announced immediately, "I will do the minimal required participation. I have no interest in collaborating with lesser species." Stoa, who until that moment had been almost invisible in her quietness, surprised everyone by speaking up. She said firmly, "We all receive the same grade. Your arrogance serves no one." The Zenturi turned his disdain toward her. He said, "And what would a Bernanke know about academic standards? Your people were barely civilized when the council found you." Nathan interjected before things could escalate. He said, "How about we focus on the actual assignment? We need to pick a cultural exchange to present. Any ideas?" Gorak sneered. He suggested mockingly, "Perhaps we should present on how humans think charity is a substitute for competence." Nathan took a slow breath. He replied evenly, "Or we could choose something actually relevant to galactic history." Stora, you have been here longer than me. What are some significant exchanges? The Bernanke girl seemed grateful for the lifeline. She suggested the Morvani-Enchuri trade agreements of the 4th cycle were transformative. They established the foundation for modern commerce routes. Gorak waved dismissively. He said, "Too obvious. Everyone does the Morvani Zenturi agreements." Nathan proposed, "What about something more recent? The integration of a new species and how it changed council dynamics." Implication hung in the air. Gorak's eyes narrowed. He said dangerously, "If you think I am going to help you create propaganda about how wonderful human integration is, you are delusional." Nathan shook his head. He clarified, "I was actually thinking about the Vexirian integration. It is recent, relevant, and, from what I understand, pretty controversial. Lots of material to work with." This caught both of them off guard. Stoa looked interested. She said, "That could work. There is certainly enough documentation." Gorak, however, saw an opportunity. He said, with false enthusiasm, "Actually, yes. Let us examine the Vexirian integration. We can explore how the council made the mistake of accepting a species with no real value, and how charity undermines the meritocratic principles that made the council strong." Nathan smiled. He countered, "Or we could examine how the council's rigid hierarchy and resource hoarding nearly caused the Vexirians to reject membership entirely, and how that would have cost the council access to Vexers' unique biological research capabilities." Gorak blinked. He said, "What biological research?" Nathan pulled up a file on the holographic display. He explained, "Vexarians have one of the most efficient metabolic systems in known space. They can process nutrition from sources that would be toxic to most species. 3 pharmaceutical companies are already negotiating for access to Vexirian metabolic research. In 10 cycles, they will probably be one of the wealthiest species in the council. He had done his homework. After meeting Tao, Nathan had spent hours researching Vexirian biology, history, and potential. What he found surprised him. The Vexarians were not weak or useless. They were simply new and underestimated. Stora leaned forward, examining the data. She said with growing interest, "I did not know this," Nathan continued. "Most people do not. Everyone sees that. They come from a poor planet and assumes they have nothing to offer, but they have been developing this research for decades. They just did not have the resources to implement it until joining the council." Gorek's expression had shifted from smugness to uncertainty. His entire worldview was built on the idea that hierarchies reflected inherent worth. The possibility that the Vexirians might rise in status challenged everything he believed. Nathan pressed his advantage. He said, "So our presentation can explore how initial perceptions of a species do not always reflect their actual value. We can examine the Vexirian integration as a case study and how the council's evaluation metrics might need updating." Stora was fully engaged now. She added, "We could compare it to the Bernanke integration. My people were also dismissed at first. We were seen as primitive warriors. Now Bernanke tactical innovations are taught at every military academy in council space. Projects suddenly had direction and purpose." Even Gorek, despite his obvious reluctance, could not argue against the academic merit of the approach. They spent the next 2 hours dividing research tasks, identifying sources, and outlining their presentation. As they worked, something unexpected happened. The forced collaboration created tiny cracks in the walls between them. Gorek remained arrogant and dismissive, but he engaged with the material. Stora revealed a sharp analytical mind behind her quiet demeanor. Nathan coordinated their efforts, finding ways to incorporate each person's strengths. When they finally ended the session, Gorek stood abruptly. He said stiffly, "I will complete my assigned research. Do not expect more than that." He left without waiting for a response. Stora lingered, gathering her materials. Slowly, she said to Nathan, "That was cleverly done. You maneuvered him into arguing for Vexirian value." Nathan shrugged. He replied, "I just presented facts. What he does with them is his choice." The Bernanke girl studied him with curiosity. She asked, "Why do you care so much about the Vexirians, about fairness, about any of this? You are new here. You could simply keep your head down and adapt." Nathan thought about the question seriously. He answered, "Because I have seen what happens when good people keep their heads down. I have studied enough human history to know that silence in the face of injustice is just another form of participation. Maybe that makes me naive or idealistic, but I would rather be that than someone who watches suffering and does nothing." Stoa nodded slowly. She said, "My people have a saying. The warrior who fights for others honors the strength they have been given." You would have made a good Bernanke, Nathan Brooks. It was the highest compliment her culture could offer. Over the following week, the 3 students met several more times to work on their project. Dynamic remained tense, but it was productive. Gorak contributed quality. Research, though he made constant. Disparaging comments, Stora provided. Historical context and analytical framework, Nathan tied it all together. Finding narratives within the data. During one session, while examining economic projections for Vexirian pharmaceutical development, Gorak suddenly spoke. He said, almost against his will, if what these projections suggest is accurate, the Vexarians will control significant market share within 20 cycles. Nathan looked up from his work. He said, that is what the data indicates. Yes. Gorak was quiet for a long moment, then he said reluctantly, I may have underestimated their potential. It was not an apology, it was barely even an admission, but coming from Gorak it was seismic. Nathan decided to push a little further. He said, the thing is, this pattern repeats throughout council history. New species joins, gets dismissed and marginalized, then eventually proves their value. The Morvani were called scavenger traders when they first joined. Now they basically run council commerce. The Bernaki were considered violent primitives. Now they are respected strategists. Stora added, perhaps the flaw is not in the species being evaluated, but in the evaluation system itself. Gorak bristled at this. He argued the system ensures that those who contribute receive appropriate resources. It is logical, Nathan countered, except it is based on current contribution, not potential contribution. It is a system that reinforces existing power structures and makes it nearly impossible for new species to rise. Vexarians get minimal resources, which limits their ability to develop and implement their research, which keeps them dependent on minimal resources. It is a cycle. Stora nodded, she said, and it benefits those already at the top too. Maintain that cycle. Gorak's face darkened. He said defensively, my people earned their position through centuries of work. Nathan held up his hands peacefully. He said, I am not saying they did not. I am saying that maybe the system could work better for everyone if it invested in potential instead of just rewarding current success. The Zenturi stood abruptly. He said, I need to verify some data sources. We will continue this later. He left again, but this time his departure felt less like anger and more like needing space to think. Stora watched him go. She said to Nathan, you are changing his mind slowly, but you are doing it. Nathan was not so sure. He replied, maybe, or maybe he will just double down on what he already believes. People do not like having their worldviews challenged. The presentation came together over the next several days. They created holographic displays showing Vexirian history, economic projections, biological research summaries, and comparative analyses with other species. Integrations. It was thorough, well-researched, and compelling. The day of the presentation arrived. Their galactic history class gathered in an amphitheater-style room. Several groups had already presented, covering topics ranging from ancient trade disputes to modern diplomatic breakthroughs. The quality varied, but all were competent. When Nathan's group was called, the three of them stood before the assembled class. The instructor, a scholarly Morvani named Tekken, watched with interest. The class included students from a dozen species, including several Vexarians who sat together in the back row. Tao was among them. Stora began the presentation, providing historical Context for council integration. Protocols. Her delivery was clear and well organized. She explained how new species were evaluated, the criteria for resource allocation, and the intended purposes of the hierarchy. Then Nathan took over, presenting the Vexirian case. Specifically, he showed data on their planet's resource limitations, their initial council reception, and the minimal provisions they received. He presented it factually, without emotional manipulation, letting the numbers speak for themselves. Gorek's section came next. He was supposed to present the economic projections and biological research findings. Everyone expected him to deliver it with his typical contempt, to undermine the Vexarians even while presenting data about their potential. But something had changed. Gorek stood before the holographic displays showing Vexirian metabolic research and pharmaceutical projections. He began speaking, and his tone, while still formal, lacked its usual derision. He said the Vexirian biological adaptations represent significant scientific value. Their metabolic efficiency could revolutionize nutrition processing across multiple species. Preliminary research suggests applications in medical treatment, long-duration space travel in hostile environment, colonization. He continued, going into detail about the economic projections, the potential market value, the strategic importance of the research. He presented it not as a curiosity or an exception, but as a legitimate and valuable contribution to council advancement. The class listened with growing attention. This was not what anyone had expected from a presentation on Vexirian integration, least of all from a group that included Gorak. Nathan concluded the presentation with a synthesis of their findings. He said, "Our research suggests that the Council's current integration model may be counterproductive to its own interest by limiting resources to new or economically disadvantaged species. The Council delays or prevents those species from developing and contributing their unique capabilities. A more investment-based model where resources are allocated based on potential rather than current output could accelerate integration and benefit all member species." He paused, looking around the room. Then he finished, "The Vexirians are not a charity case. They are an emerging power that the Council is fortunate to have as members. The question is whether the Council's systems are flexible enough to recognize that before it is too late." The presentation ended. There was a moment of silence. Then Instructor Tekken began asking questions. He probed their methodology, challenged some of their projections, and tested their understanding of the historical precedents. All three students answered competently, demonstrating that they had truly collaborated on the work. Finally, Tekken nodded with satisfaction. He said, "This is excellent work. You have taken a contemporary issue and analyzed it through multiple frameworks. Your conclusions are controversial, but they are well supported. This is exactly the kind of critical thinking we aim to develop." The class applauded politely. As Nathan's group returned to their seats, he caught sight of Tao in the back row. The Vexirian boy was staring at them with an expression of wonder and something that looked like pride. After class, several students approached them with questions. Most were genuinely curious about the Vexarian research they had presented. A few Vexarian students came up to thank them, their voices quiet but sincere. One older Vexarian girl said to Nathan, "You did not have to do this. You could have chosen any topic. Why shine light on our struggles?" Nathan replied simply, "Because they are not just your struggles, they are a flaw in how the council operates, and flaws do not fix themselves." As the crowd dispersed, Gorak stood awkwardly to the side. Nathan noticed him and walked over. He said, "You did good work on the economic section, really solid research." The Zenturi looked uncomfortable. He said stiffly, "It was simply accurate data presentation." Nathan smiled. He said, "It was more than that. You could have presented it differently, made it seem less significant." "You did not." Gorak was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, quietly enough that only Nathan could hear, "Perhaps I was wrong about some things, not everything, but some things." It was as close to an apology as Nathan was ever going to get, and he recognized it as such. He extended his hand in the human gesture of respect. He said, "That is all anyone can ask." Gorak looked at the offered hand, clearly uncertain about the gesture's meaning. After a moment, he reached out and clasped it. Briefly, the handshake was awkward and quick, but it was a bridge, however small. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at the academy began to shift. In subtle ways, the presentation had sparked conversations about resource allocation and integration protocols. Students who had never questioned the system before were now discussing alternatives. It was not a revolution, but it was a beginning. The cafeteria remained a social battleground, but the dynamics had changed. Vexarian students sat together openly now, no longer trying to hide. Some students from other species occasionally joined them, breaking the invisible barriers that had existed. Tao found himself at the center of a growing circle of friends from diverse backgrounds. Nathan continued his studies, trying to stay out of the spotlight, but he found that his relationship with other students had evolved. Some viewed him with respect, others with weariness, but very few with the dismissive attitude that humans had initially received. One day, about a month after the presentation, Nathan was studying in the academy's central library when instructor Veshna approached him. She sat down across from him without asking permission. She said, "Nathan Brooks, you have become quite influential in a very short time." He looked up from his data pad. He replied, "I'm just trying to learn and get along." "Ma'am," Vesna smiled. She said, "And yet wherever you go, change seems to follow. The council has taken notice of your presentation. There are discussions happening at high levels about integration protocols." Nathan was not sure if that was good or bad. He asked, "Am I in trouble?" The instructor laughed. She answered, "No, quite the opposite. You are demonstrating exactly why the council was interested in humans. Your species has a remarkable capacity for challenging assumptions and finding new perspectives on old problems." She leaned forward slightly. She continued, "But I want you to understand something. Change at the council level is slow and political. What you started with a simple act of kindness in a cafeteria has grown into something larger, but it will not result in immediate transformation. You must be patient." Nathan nodded. He said, "I understand, but even if the council does not change its policies, at least students here are thinking differently. That has to count for something." Bessied him with an expression that mixed approval and concern. She said, "You remind me of the Morvani activists who first pushed for democratic reforms in council governance centuries ago. They faced significant opposition. Some paid dearly for their advocacy. The warning was clear. Nathan acknowledged it with a serious nod. He replied, I will be careful, but I will not stop caring about what is right just because it is difficult. The instructor stood. She said, good, the universe needs people who care. Just remember that caring and surviving are not mutually exclusive. Do both. She left him to his studies, but Nathan found it hard to concentrate. He had not intended to become an activist or a symbol. He had simply given his lunch to a hungry kid. Everything that followed had been a consequence he had not predicted. He thought about Earth, about all the social movements and changes that had shaped human history. They had all started with individuals who decided that the status quo was unacceptable. Some had succeeded, some had failed, but all had tried. That was the human legacy, for better or worse. The refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they were. As the academic term progressed, Nathan's friendship with Tao deepened. The Vexirian boy was whip-smart with a particular talent for biological sciences. He helped Nathan understand some of the more complex aspects of xenobiology, while Nathan shared insights about human culture and history. One evening they sat together on one of the academy's observation decks looking out at the stars. Tao said thoughtfully, when I first came here, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. I thought I would spend years being invisible, being nothing. Then you gave me your lunch. Nathan shrugged. He said it was just food. Tao shook his head firmly. He replied, no, it was proof that someone saw me as worthy of basic dignity, that someone thought I mattered. Do you understand how powerful that was? Nathan did understand. Actually, he had read enough history to know how transformative simple recognition could be. He said, you always mattered, Tao. I just made sure others could not pretend otherwise. Vexirian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have been communicating with my family back home. I told them what happened here, about the presentation, about the discussions it started. My father says that the Vexirian Council representatives are now citing your work in their negotiations for better resource allocations. Nathan turned to stare at him. He said seriously. Tao nodded. He explained, the economic projections and research validation your group presented gave them ammunition. They can now argue from a position of proven value rather than just requesting charity. It is changing how they are treated. Nathan felt the weight settle on him, but it was not entirely unpleasant. His actions had rippled further than he had imagined. He said, that is incredible, but it is also kind of terrifying. I am just a student. I should not have this kind of influence. Tao smiled, his golden eyes reflecting starlight. He said, my people believe that moments choose people, not the other way around. You were chosen by that moment in the cafeteria. What you did with it was up to you. You chose. Well, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching distant suns burn in the void. Eventually Tao spoke again. He said quietly, I want to tell you something. When I am hungry now, which is still often because our rations have not increased yet, I think about that day. I think about how you stood up to Gorek and the others. I think about how you valued me when others did not. And it makes the hunger easier to bear, because I know it is temporary. I know things can change. Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion. He managed to say things will change Tao, maybe. Not as fast as they should, but they will. You are going to do amazing things, and the whole council is going to know it. The Vexirian boy ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. He said, "We will see. But Nathan, whatever I accomplish, I will remember that it started with you sharing your lunch." The term continued. The research presentation had earned Nathan's group the highest marks in the class, and instructor Tekken had submitted it to an academic journal that published student work. There was talk of it being featured at an upcoming symposium on integration protocols. Gorek had not become friendly exactly, but his hostility had evaporated. He nodded to Nathan. In hallways now occurred acknowledgement, but an acknowledgement nonetheless. His treatment of Vexirian students had not transformed into warmth, but the act of cruelty had stopped. It was progress. Stora had become a genuine friend. She and Nathan often studied together, and she introduced him to Bernanke philosophy and combat techniques. In exchange, he taught her about human literature and music. Cultural exchange in its purest form. The human contingent at the academy had grown slightly. 3 more students had arrived from Earth, bringing news from home. Humanity was rapidly advancing its space capabilities. Studying council technology with characteristic determination. There was talk of Earth establishing a permanent embassy station within the next cycle. Sarah Morgan, who had initially criticized Nathan's cafeteria intervention, approached him one day with an apology. She said, "I was wrong to say you should have kept your head down. What you did mattered. I was just scared of standing out, of making enemies, but I am realizing that playing it safe is not always the right choice." Nathan appreciated the sentiment. He replied, "You are not wrong to be cautious. We are in a strange position here, representing our entire species. There is no perfect way to handle that. We just do our best." As the term drew to a close, the Academy prepared for its annual convergence celebration, a massive event where students from all species showcased their cultures. It was part festival, part educational exhibition, part social bonding exercise. The human students had been planning their contribution for weeks. They decided to present a multimedia exhibit on human history, art, music, and food. Nathan had been tasked with creating a section on human philosophy and social movements. The day of the celebration arrived. The Academy's central commons had been transformed into a maze of exhibits, performance spaces, and food stations. The diversity on display was staggering. Century crystal sculptures that sang when touched, Morvani holographic poetry that shifted based on the viewer's emotional state, Bernanke martial demonstrations that blended combat and dance. The human exhibit drew steady crowds. Students were fascinated by Earth's diversity, confused by its contradictions, and moved by its artistic expressions. Nathan's philosophy section featured quotes from figures throughout human history, accompanied by historical context. One display caught particular attention. It showed the evolution of human rights movements from ancient philosophical debates to modern activism. Nathan had included visuals of protests, civil disobedience, social reforms, and the long struggle toward equality and justice. A group of Vexirian students stood before this display for a long time reading every word, studying every image. Tao was among them, and when he caught Nathan's eye, he smiled and gave a small nod of understanding. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, a formal announcement was made. The Academy's administration had decided to form a student council to provide input on Academy policies, including resource allocation and integration support. It was a small step, but it was official recognition that student voices mattered. Elections would be held the following week. Species could nominate representatives. To no one's surprise, Tao was nominated to represent the Vexirian students. Stora was nominated for the Bernanke, and despite having been at the Academy for less than a term, Nathan was nominated to represent humanity. He tried to decline, arguing that he was too new, that there were other humans more qualified, but his fellow Earth students insisted. Sarah Morgan said firmly, "You are the reason this council is being created. You have to be part of it." Elections were held. All three were selected by their respective groups. The council's first meeting was scheduled for the following month. On the final day of term, before students dispersed for a brief recess period, Nathan found himself back in the cafeteria. It was lunchtime and the space was crowded as always, but the atmosphere felt different now. The rigid segregation had softened. Mixed groups sat together at many tables. Laughter crossed species barriers. Nathan got his food and looked around for a place to sit. He spotted Tycho waving at him from a table that also included Stoa, two other Vexirian students, a Morvani girl, and, surprisingly, a Zenturi boy who was not Gorak but who had been part of his circle. He walked over and sat down. Tao said cheerfully, "We saved you a seat." Nathan looked at the diverse group around the table and felt something that might have been hope. He said, "Thanks. This is nice." The Morvani girl, whose name was Telva, said, "We were just discussing the student council. Tao says you going to push for ration reforms." Nathan nodded. He replied, "Among other things, the resource allocation system needs updating. It is one of our priorities." The Zenturi boy Meccan spoke up. He said hesitantly, "My people will not like that. Ration reforms could mean reduced allocations for higher tier species to balance resources." Nathan met his gaze steadily. He said, "Maybe, or maybe it means finding efficiencies in the system so everyone gets what they need without anyone losing anything. But even if it does mean some rebalancing, is that really so terrible? Having enough is not the same as deserving excess while others starve." Meccan did not argue. He thought about it, then nodded slowly. He said, "I suppose not. It will be a difficult argument to make to my people, but I suppose it is a fair one." Conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on classes, upcoming assignments, plans for the recess period. It was ordinary and mundane and absolutely remarkable. As Nathan ate, he thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had started with an empty tray and a simple decision: "Take mine, I'm full." Those 5 words had set everything else in motion. He had not solved galactic inequality. He had not revolutionized the council. He had not even permanently fixed the Academy's resource allocation problems, but he had made it possible for a hungry kid to eat lunch without shame. He had started conversations that were still rippling outward. He had proven that one person's choice to care could matter. That night Nathan stood Again on the observation deck, looking out at the infinite stars, Tao joined him. After a few minutes, they stood in comfortable silence, two young beings from very different worlds brought together by circumstance and choice. Tycho said softly, I am going home for the recess period. I am nervous. My family has heard so much about what has happened here. I do not know if I can live up to their expectations. Nathan put a hand on his shoulder. He said, you already have, just by being here, by surviving, by not giving up even when things were hard. That is enough. Anything else is extra. The Vexarian looked at him. He asked, do you really believe that? Nathan smiled. He answered, I do. You know why? Because worth is not something you have to earn through achievements. It is something you have just by existing. That is the thing Gorak and people like him never understood. You do not have to prove you deserve to eat. You do not have to prove you deserve dignity. Those things should be given. Tycho's eyes shimmered with emotion. He said, thank you, Nathan, for everything, for the lunch, for the presentation, for the friendship, for seeing me when I felt invisible. Nathan felt his own emotions rising. He replied, thank you for letting me be your friend, for teaching me about your people and your world, for showing me that kindness can actually change things. They stood together looking at stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Somewhere out there, Earth continued its ancient rotation, home to billions of humans who were just beginning to understand their place in the greater universe. Somewhere else, the Vexarian home world orbited its sun, a place of scarcity transforming into a place of potential, and here on a neutral station, floating in the void between worlds, two young people from different species shared a moment of friendship that represented everything the Galactic Council was supposed to be about. The future was uncertain. The Student Council might accomplish great things or might be stymied by bureaucracy. The Council's integration protocols might reform or might remain stubbornly unchanged. Tao might become the scientist he dreamed of being or might face obstacles Nathan could not predict. But in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that hungry boy had been fed. What mattered was that cruelty had been challenged. What mattered was that someone had cared enough to act. As Nathan turned to head back to his quarters, Tao called out to him. He said, Nathan, wait, there is something I want to give you. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small object. It was a crystal, roughly cut but beautiful, with veins of gold running through translucent blue. He held it out to Nathan. He explained, this is for my home world. It is called a memory stone. We give them to people who have changed our lives. It is supposed to hold the memory of the moment, preserve it forever. Nathan took the crystal carefully. He said, I do not know what to say. This is beautiful. Tao smiled. He said, you do not have to say anything. Just remember that you mattered, that what you did mattered, that kindness matters. Nathan closed his hand around the stone. Feeling its smooth warmth, he replied, I will, I promise. They parted ways, heading to their separate dormitories. Nathan placed the memory stone on his desk where it caught the artificial light and threw golden patterns on the walls. He sat on his bunk and pulled out his personal data pad, preparing to record a message to send home to Earth. He began speaking. He said, hey, Mom and Dad, I know my last message was Pretty basic, just saying I arrived safely and classes started. This one is going to be longer because a lot has happened. I want to tell you about a friend I made, a kid named Tao, and about how sometimes the smallest actions can create the biggest changes. He talked for nearly an hour, telling them everything about the cafeteria, the confrontation, the presentation, the student council, the friendships formed. He told them about Vexerian metabolic research and Bernanke philosophy and Zenchuri arrogance slowly giving way to understanding. He finished by saying, I guess what I am trying to say is that everything you taught me about standing up for what is right and helping people who need it, that stuff matters even out here among the stars, maybe especially out here. The universe is bigger and stranger than I ever imagined, but people are still people, no matter what species they are. They still feel hunger and hope and fear and joy, and they still need others who care. He sent the message, knowing it would take time to reach Earth across the vast distances. Then he lay back on his bunk, exhausted. But content, the term had been challenging and transformative. He had made enemies and friends. He had learned about alien cultures and about himself. He had discovered that being human meant carrying forward a legacy of both terrible mistakes and incredible compassion, and choosing each day which part of that legacy to embody. Tomorrow he would leave for Earth, returning home for a brief visit before the next term began. He would walk on his home world, soil, breathe its air, see his family and friends. Then he would return to the academy, to his work on the student council, to his friendships with beings from across the galaxy. But tonight he allowed himself to simply be a young man who had done a good thing and seen it grow into something meaningful. He thought about Tao going home to his family, proud and hopeful. He thought about Stowe practicing her combat forms with new confidence. He even thought about Gorak wrestling with ideas that challenged everything he had been taught to believe. The galaxy was vast and complex and often unfair, but it was also full of possibility. It was full of people like Tao who just needed a chance. It was full of people like Stoa who understood that strength meant protecting others. It was even full of people like Gorak who could chain slowly and reluctantly, but chain nonetheless. And now it included humanity with all its flaws and all its potential. Humans who had looked at a universe ordered by rigid hierarchies and resource hoarding and said, no, there has to be a better way. Humans who believed that kindness was not weakness, that compassion was not illogical, that feeding a hungry child was not naive but necessary. Nathan closed his eyes, the memory stones, warmth still lingering in his palm. He thought about all the humans throughout history who had stood up when it would have been easier to sit down, who had spoken when it would have been safer to stay silent, who had cared when it would have been simpler not to. He thought about the simple words that had started everything. Take mine, I'm full. 5 words that had challenged a system, changed minds, built friendships, and proven that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its adaptability or its stubbornness. It was its fundamental, sometimes foolish, often beautiful insistence that every person mattered. That was the human contribution to the Galactic Council. Not weapons or resources or unique abilities, but a different way of seeing the universe, a way that valued compassion over efficiency, dignity over hierarchy, potential over current Status, it would not be an easy path. There would be resistance and setbacks, and moments of doubt, but Nathan had learned something important during his time at the academy. Change did not require perfection. It did not require grand gestures or revolutionary upheaval. Sometimes it just required one person deciding to share their lunch. And that was something any human could do. As sleep claimed him, Nathan smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The student council would convene, debates would rage, reforms would be proposed and fought over. But whatever came, he would face it the same way he had faced that moment in the cafeteria, with open hands and an open heart, ready to share what he had with those who needed it, because that was what humans did, and that was humanity. An NBSP, yeah, and that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like.